Hi, I'm here with my colleagues Paul and Duncan. So we're going to be talking about Scrum Masters and delivery leads, and with a understanding of how those roles relate to each other. And the first question is: Are we seeing a trend away from Scrum Masters within organizations, and organizations preferring to bring in uh, or to have delivery leads within their organization? What are we seeing? Who wants to come in?
I think anecdotally, probably, I'm certainly seeing that. If I talk to colleagues who maybe previously would be in the contract market for Scrum Master or Agile Coach roles, I think they're increasingly being asked more now to take more of an active role in the delivery as well, and all that entails. I think organizations are pressed for budgets and headcounts, and maybe they're asking for more than they previously were. What do you think, Paul?
I think it's a bit of a mix. So I think some organizations are being quite sort of like we're a Scrum outfit and this is what we do. So therefore, having a Scrum Master, it makes perfect sense. But I think there's a large set of organizations that aren't trying to be Scrum purists, and also seeing a rise of things like DevOps and Kanban as well. So it doesn't make sense for those sorts of teams to say, well, we've got a Scrum Master, but we're not doing Scrum. So I think Agile Delivery Lead also partly become that generic Scrum Master sort of job title. We're doing some sort of Agile. We're not being prescriptive. We're not trying to do Scrum as per the guide, but we want somebody who takes on elements of a Scrum Master role, but also other elements as well. And I think also there is a sort of a shift away from this. All right, if you use say LinkedIn as a litmus test, there is a kind of a shift away from purism in the agile sense as well.
There's a couple of organizations I work with, and the way they've structured themselves is they have a product area with product managers and product owners and product leads and heads of product and all that kind of stuff. There's an engineering section with roles within there, and then they talk about a delivery section with delivery leads in it in terms of doing that. And those three are the kind of like internal hierarchies that we've seen. And there's a couple of organisations I've seen that do that, and they even though they have agile kind of coaches within the delivery, they don't specifically have Scrum Masters, but they do have delivery leads. And so I think it's something I've seen maybe over the last couple of years that I hadn't seen particularly strongly prior to that. So personally, I do think it is becoming more of a trend. That doesn't mean it's taken over completely. There's definitely Scrum Master roles out there, but I'm just noticing it more and more.
Yes, one distinction to make is the difference between job titles and the substance of the way that roles are being organized. So, for example, in the past, I've held job titles such as technical project manager and development manager, whereas what I've been doing day to day has been very closely aligned with what you associate with a scrum master. I've been being a scrum master, where in my contract it said something slightly different. And then similarly, I'm sure we've all seen jobs advertised for scrum masters where if you look at the job description, it says things like produce the weekly RAG status report, or manage delivery and drive the team and things like that. Do we think
Mm.
there's a change in the substance of the roles and moving away from what a scrum master would traditionally do, getting closer to more project delivery or ownership of the accountability for delivering work?
I suspect part of that is born from a lot of organizations not really knowing what Scrum Masters do, and the reaction to bad Scrum Mastery. So I think that there's a misconception that what Scrum Masters do is run meetings and do admin. They administer Jira and do Tinder themed retros and things like that. And if that's what somebody's doing and they're only £60,000 a year, then I can imagine that you're not going to be quite so happy with the the output of that kind of that role. Whereas the reality of a Scrum Master is that you should be accountable for the effective implementation of Scrum, but also the effectiveness of the Scrum team. So is a much more senior role than what a lot of people have it implemented. So I think that people are saying, "Oh, Scrum Masters are rubbish," because they don't actually make any difference. All they do is run meetings. So therefore, we want somebody who's more engaged with delivery. But really, that should be what Scrum Masters are doing anyway.
That's interesting. So that vacuum that is missing. So if a Scrum Master is really required to spend 10% of their working life running meetings. If you add up the sprint planning sessions, the daily scrums, and so on and so forth, reviews, retrospectives, that's about 10% of a full-time role. What you're supposed to be doing in the rest of that time is helping and supporting the team to grow and to be effective. And if maybe due to lack of skills or training or support, maybe if that's not been happening, that vacuum is being filled with more project orientated things. And maybe that's where the trends towards delivery leadership is coming in. What are you doing all day? We'd better give you responsibility for providing the RAG statuses or whipping the team, whatever it
Yeah,
might
but I
be.
think even with like you taking on those sort of what we traditionally call project management type accountabilities, just reporting on RAG statuses still wouldn't make you a very good like project manager anyway. So I think we have to be sort of quite clear. Well, what is regardless of what your job title is, like whether you're a Scrum Master or an Agile delivery lead, like how do you help your team get things delivered? Because that's your job.
What we're seeing in terms of expectations of delivery leads over and above what we might expect from a Scrum Master. I think you made a really good point there, Paul, about the Scrum Masters actually have a lot of these accountabilities already. What from the sort of places we've worked and the adverts we've seen or the expectations is sort of beyond that Scrum Master role that is an expectation of someone doing a delivery lead role.
So I think when you look at a lot of agile teams, they kind of go, well, we don't do risk management, that's project management. And so there's no risk log or risk, and then so therefore there's no risk mitigations going into the product backlog or anything like that. So I think one of the things that organizations are asking their delivery leads to help with is actually sort of helping sort of put some structure around risk management. And it's kind of a misnomer to say agile projects don't have risk. All projects have risk. So to just kind of like go, well, we're agile, we don't have risks, so therefore we're not going to do what is considered good practice around thinking about what might go wrong and how you can prevent it. That's a weakness, and I think this is where this delivery role starts to call out those sorts of things. I think also a lot of organizations are struggling with this also misnomer that agile teams can't you can't give dates and milestones and things like that because there's this myth that that's what Scrum Masters say this myth. Therefore, delivery leads we're pushing that as a specific accountability onto delivery leads is you must be now forecasting the releases. So I think a lot of it is reacting to sort of the perpetuation of certain myths.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I've certainly worked in organisations where we've gone in and the Scrum Master has come back and kind of said, "Oh, well, we're agile. We don't plan ahead. We just go from sprint to sprint kind of thing," which is obviously wrong. And very frustrating for the organisation. I think it's that difference between not having a plan versus having a plan, but you're willing to monitor it, you see how it's going, change the plan, and keep people kind of updated. So certainly that forecasting is part of that. I think there's an element of forecasting that we would normally expect the product owner to do as well, particularly in relation to communication to stakeholders. How does that relate to delivery lead?
So I think in Scrum you would say that the product owner is accountable for understanding when they're going to release the product because they know the scope and they know they're basically making the decision at this point, when we've got to here, we've delivered this, then we're going to release it. So they have that thing, but they may not necessarily have the skills to do the forecast. So there's a difference between accountable and responsible. The person doing the forecasting doesn't have to be the product owner. The product owner can delegate it to anybody they choose. Somebody in the team has to understand the tools and techniques that are required for forecasting. And so I think, again, where there's a vacuum, someone has to fill it. And I think this is where organizations are now saying, well, like product owners too busy doing producty things, being visionaries, and we don't really want them being project manager oriented sort of things. So we're going to shift that accountability onto, or at least the responsibility, not necessarily accountability, onto the delivery lead.
I wonder if it's worth, for a moment, thinking about it from the organizational point of view. So if you're accountable for running a department and maybe a team of several products, so sort of a few hundred people, engineers, if what we think is happening is happening, and if we're seeing a trend towards delivery leadership, where organizations are asking people in traditional Scrum Master positions to additionally take on things that we've just been talking about, things like managing the forecasting and assessing the risks, managing that. What might be driving that trend from the organization point of view? Why now? What are they wanting? What's causing this shift? And is there a way that we can help solve that problem?
So what's causing the shift? I think any absence of information causes a shift. And all organizations will want to know, what is it and when am I going to get it? It's a fundamental business question, isn't it? I'm investing this amount of money into engineering teams. What do I get back for it? And that's a perfectly reasonable question. I remember back when I was doing XP 20 years ago, there was the customer bill of rights. And I think one of the things it says is, I have the right to an estimate. And there was obviously an engineering one which said, I have the right to change my estimate. But that's is a thing. I think there's and also again with extreme programming, the equivalent of the Scrum Master was called the coach, and then there was another role called the tracker. So it wasn't, so this idea that Scrum Masters don't do tracking is more of a more recent sort of, it's very specific to Scrum at the moment. And historically, those things were part of that role. So we've moved away, we've created this vacuum, and now, there's a reaction to that. Oh, we don't know when things are going to get delivered. So therefore we need to make someone accountable for telling us.
Absolutely, yeah. As you say, it's perfectly legitimate for organizations to want to have some level of predictability and to want to know that risks are being understood, mitigated where necessary, accepted where that's the right thing to do. What do we think as delivery professionals, if we can be so grand, what is our view on whether there is a fundamental problem with that being a Scrum Master-esque type person, a delivery lead? Is it inherently a problem if the person in that position is managing the risks and taking the lead and doing the estimating?
I guess the danger is whether are you facilitating the process, or are you speaking on behalf of somebody else, and therefore taking away their accountability for that work or decision. So, for example, if the Scrum Master is or delivery lead is the person that turns up every sprint planning and saying, right, the velocity, we're going to plan 20 points because our average over the last 3 sprints has been 20 points, then what you're doing is you're taking the accountability for effective planning away from the people doing the work, and that results in less ownership of the plans, daily scrums, but also ultimately failure to achieve goals. So yeah, you have to be mindful that you're not taking away people's ownership and accountability by doing these things. But there's a different sort of way of doing it. You could say, well, here's the data, like, let's discuss it. I know how the tools work, I know how to forecast. But rather than me deciding I'm going to use 20 points to extrapolate, maybe the team say, well, Paul, that's you're setting us up for failure if you use that. Why don't we use 18 points or 90% percentile of success, which maybe is 15 points, so we use that. so it becomes a team discussion, and then you just kind of putting the polish on it, really.
Yeah. So it's possible to run things effectively or ineffectively, however you break up the accountabilities. So if you
Mm,
think maybe at a really simplistic definition, one of the main differences between a Scrum Master and a delivery lead is that with a delivery lead, you're taking the responsibility for forecasting away from the product owner and giving it to the delivery lead. And in that pattern, it's possible to do that with anti-patterns. So you can, as you say, make commitments on behalf of the team. Equally, if I've seen Scrum teams where the Scrum Master is overstepping,
mm,
maybe even doing something similar, either saying to the business, we can't estimate because we're agile, at which point the business thinks, well, maybe we shouldn't be agile then. Or the Scrum Master is overstepping and is essentially doing it for the team and making promises on their behalf. So whichever way you do it, you can do it well or you can do it badly. Maybe
mm,
it's just a question of getting back to the fundamentals. However, you've chosen to lay out the accountabilities across the people within the organization,
mm,
do it with a bit of rigor, do it with techniques that are lending themselves to people taking ownership, and sort of have somebody who is in effect in charge of good delivery practice and assessing whether things are working well or not.
mm,
I think one factor here is the perception of the stakeholders, because I think in a sort of classic sort of Scrum setting, the stakeholders go through product really. The product manage that relationship with the stakeholders, and things like forecasting and stuff goes through the product owner in terms of doing that. I think what I've seen in organisations where with the delivery leaders, there's an expectation that if they want an update on the forecast, however it's done, and hopefully done in a way that brings in the experience and knowledge of the team itself, those stakeholders have an expectation they can go to the delivery lead in order to find out information. And so I think there's potentially a sort of a difference there, in terms of managing stakeholder and stakeholder expectations. Is that something you've seen?
I think that certainly varies company by company. It depends maybe a little bit on the level of experience, either of the product owner or the delivery lead slash scrum master. Sometimes one or the other has been around a lot longer and it has naturally got that network with the stakeholders. I don't know if I've seen any particular trend as to whether or not either the scrum master, the delivery lead, or the product owner is the key contact, depending on what their job title is. I've known scrum masters who are very central and very, very much, the core part of the network. I've known delivery leads who are less well known, maybe they're sort of relatively inexperienced, and the product owner has is the experienced person with the network. So yeah, I don't know. I think it just differs everywhere you go. It's always a little bit, the way things are fallen are different in each organization.
I think the other thing to probably think about though is that again, agile changes all the time, right? And in the 2020 version of the Scrum Guide, one of the things it says is the Scrum team is accountable for stakeholder management. So it's not just so there is that shift. It used to be the product owner was the stakeholder person, and now it's the Scrum team, which tells us actually there's different conversations need to happen with different people, and if it's always the product owner that's accountable for stakeholders, then that means that, well, can a developer talk to a customer? And how does a Scrum Master resolve an impediment if the product owner is accountable for all those stakeholder conversations? And I think if you go back to the basic principles of Agile, it's about sort of bringing people together to have the best conversation that is possible and removing as many barriers as we can. So I think we have to be mindful that kind of we say, well, only this person is accountable for that, and therefore no one else can have those conversations. That's almost the antithesis of what we want to try and do.
Absolutely, yeah. Whenever something like that comes up in a training course where you're dealing with the theory, I think my response is always just use your common sense. Don't overthink it. Yes, it says this in the Scrum Guide. Just do what is, as long as you're not majorly undermining one of the fundamental principles of which the framework is built. Um, if you're a developer, you want to talk to a customer, talk to the customer. Probably the product owner has an accountability for the long-term relationship and long-term success, but do
Yeah,
what seems right at the time, and you're probably
yeah.
not going to go too far wrong. Interesting what you're saying about, agile changing and, the industry moving on. And one of the things here is that sort of shift towards delivery leadership. One of the things I was thinking about coming into this session is what's what would you do if you were in as we all are actually, now, what if you're in that position? What if you are a delivery practitioner, a delivery professional? Maybe you're a Scrum Master right now, maybe you're a freelance Agile coach, or maybe you're a delivery lead. How should we, as delivery practitioners who are invested in frameworks like Scrum, how should we respond to this trend?
I was talking about a delivery lead the other day, and we were actually talking about engineers. And we were talking about how one of the challenges they have is some people can only program in like front end and different people only do back end or iOS versus Android. And we just talk about the challenges of when people are I-shaped individuals that they're so they have deep expertise but only in one area. And we need to apply that concept to ourselves. If you are, I'm only a Scrum Master, then I am an I-shaped individual, but Scrum is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Agile. And there's extreme programming, Kanban. We can take all of those concepts and use them to be additive. Not it doesn't have to be a zero. So it's I've got Scrum tattooed on my arm, so therefore I'm only ever going to do Scrum. So I think the thing, my advice would be become more T-shaped if you're a Scrum Master and learn about the benefits of the technical practices in extreme programming, learn about flow and throughput from Kanban, and learn about the lean wastes, and maybe there's ideas from DSDM that you could look at, and the 12 agile principles, and start to bring these all together to become a much more rich individual and really understand what the principles of agile are rather than just the practices.
Interesting. So maybe if you're in a position where you're looking for a role, or maybe even your organization is having a reorg and
Mm.
changing job titles, being less, I guess, sort of less dogmatic about the job title. Well, no, I'm a Scrum Master. I couldn't possibly be a delivery lead, but actually looking at the nuance of it. It's, is what is being proposed here, or is this role that I'm applying for going to be supportive of people working effectively and collaboratively and creating value, even if the job title is not to my taste?
Mm.
Or actually, is there, even if the job title is right, is there something that's not quite effective here that I wouldn't really want to be a part of? But having that openness, being able
Yeah.
to respond to change as we keep telling people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Duncan. One of the clients I'm working with at the moment, I'm doing an interim delivery lead role, and one of the teams I'm working with is a Scrum team, and I'm effectively a Scrum Master of that team with a few extra accountabilities. But one of the other teams is a Kanban um, team, so I'm helping them measure and improve flow as we go through, and that's all under the one sort of delivery lead umbrella, really. So I think it does um, lend that opportunity to develop skills in a number of areas rather than just thinking about Scrum as and Scrum Mastery as a specific role in its own right.
Yeah. It'd be weird to call if somebody was leading a Kanban team, it'd be weird to call them a Scrum Master.
Hmm.
They're not the master of Scrum. If their team's doing Kanban, maybe they're a Kanban master or Scrum Master is specific to Scrum, but an Agile delivery lead is a almost like a generic thing. Like we are, we're going to use the most appropriate framework for the type of work that we have to do. And if you ended up in that simple domain of where everything is known and you're making cupcakes in a factory, then maybe you're going to use waterfall instead. It's about understanding the problem domain, choosing the right approach, and having that flexibility, but also the ability to then help lead your team through that approach.
Hmm. Where would you draw the line? One of the things I always quite liked about the Scrum framework is that there's certain things where if you change those, you're breaking rules of Scrum.
Mm.
Not that anybody's going to revoke your Scrum Master license, but it's drawing attention to an underlying dysfunction which you should probably fix. So I'm wondering if you're sort of looking at a role or looking at what you're being asked to do, where at what point would you say actually this is not really helping? If we do it this way, it's not going to be a good thing. What kind of responsibilities or activities would you sort of call into question? It may be associated with the trends towards delivery leadership.
Yeah, so I guess what you're talking about is systems thinking, isn't it? Really
Hmm.
seeing your agile framework as a system, and if you then start cherry picking practices, what is the upstream and downstream implications of that approach? So, for example, the Scrum Guide says you that must have a sprint goal, and it says that you can only have one. So, if you've got five sprint goals, then you're not you're deviating from the Scrum Guide. Does that mean you're not delivering value? No, it doesn't. Does it mean that you could potentially deliver value in a more optimal way? Maybe, but not always guaranteed. Is it that we want to change, do we stretch the Scrum framework or whatever framework it is to meet, the organizational challenges, or do we stretch the organization to meet, to meet the perfect agile framework?
Hmm.
And I think one of the things we always say is it's not necessarily about getting agile right or agile perfect or perfect Scrum. It's ultimately about delivering value to your customers that impacts your business.
So I guess it draws your attention in. So is modifying my approach here going to be a valid adaptation to the circumstances? This organization is advertising a delivery lead role, looking at what they're doing. They want me to also take the lead in doing the forecasting and feeding that to the stakeholders. That's different from the way I would do it. But is it fun? Is it different in such a way that it would prevent value being delivered? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But it's a question to ask yourself, isn't it? So if you're in that position, you can make that assessment. And the difference draws your attention to asking that question.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point because I think the that focus on delivery and thinking of Scrum as one of the tools you could use in order to be effective delivery, I think is probably um, what comes forward in my mind that the role is about delivery, whereas I think there is a danger, and I've seen it occasionally. I think where people come in as a Scrum Master and they think their role is to get everyone to be doing Scrum by the book, right? So they'll get into theoretical arguments about why this contravenes the guide or whatever, and they're so focused on everything kind of being right. I'm not saying this is good practice or recommended, but it's an anti-pattern. But we'll kind of see that they think, right, we've got to focus on the Scrum bit. Whereas if you're a delivery lead, there's a clear indication there that the focus is on delivery, and obviously if you can use Scrum or other frameworks well in order to do that, then that is part of the job. But it's about delivering value. It's not about this framework or that framework.
Mm. I think you also have to be mindful, though, that when you think about systems, Scrum is a system, Kanban is a system. If you don't fully understand the system, if you modify one of the elements of it without a full appreciation of how the system works, then you do get unintended consequences.
Mm.
So maybe you say, "Oh, you, the team don't like meeting every day for the daily scrum, so we're going to meet once a week, for example." Okay, right, we've modified the thing. We've kind of like we're satisfying the team. The unintended consequences might be less collaboration, less you know less ability to sort of track progress during the sprints, and therefore at the end of the sprint, maybe you don't quite you maybe you don't deliver everything you planned, and then you've got more rollover, and therefore then if you have more rollover, you've got more volatility in your forecasting, and therefore you become unpredictable. So that one, it's like the chaos thing, isn't it? The butterfly flapping its wings. One small change can have sort of quite a big ripple effect further down the line. So if you do change it, you have to make sure that you're not just changing it because either it's you don't want to do it or it doesn't quite. You've got to really understand the consequences of taking things out and adding things in as well. So
So
for example.
yeah. So making changes there. So having the daily scrum once a week instead of once a day is papering over the cracks. The real issue often is something like actually this team is all working on individual streams of work. There's no real benefit from having a daily scrum because they're all doing separate stuff. Maybe you should either change the way that they work, have people collaborate and do one or two projects across a team, or you should carry on as you are. Maybe it's absolutely fine and the right thing to do for that team to be working on individual streams of work. Move to Kanban to reflect that more accurately, and make it more effective in that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess one of the thinking about this difference from the Scrum framework in the delivery lead having accountability for forecasting and also budgets as well, quite a common thing. If we were to think why that wasn't the way that it was done in Scrum and what dysfunctions might be identified if an organization isn't having product owners being accountable for long-term forecasting, release planning, and ownership of the budget, what kind of anti-patterns might we be on the lookout for if the product owner is entirely focused on what to build without having too much accountability for when it's going to be delivered and how much it's going to cost and so on?
Yeah, I guess one of the sort of ways of thinking about a product owner is that they are a business person ultimately. They are, there to create a return on investment from the product. You delight your customers, be visionary, experimental on things, but ultimately it's a business type role, isn't it? So if you're not accountable for, how much you're spending, how much that affects the cost of the product and therefore how much you've got to sell the product. So if you're not accountable, if you have no interest of knowing how much you're spending, then that means that actually you're probably not able to also get involved in the pricing discussions of your product as well. Which, if you're, say, a more junior product owner, you're probably not involved in those pricing conversations anyway, but more senior product owners be would actually see that as part of the product strategy. And maybe they're not tracking the costs, but they should probably know what their burn rate is. So again, this is the difference, I suppose, between accountable and responsible. Yeah, I'm accountable for knowing how much I'm spending. Am I actually tracking that on a daily basis? Perhaps not. So, for example, I've been a project manager and a program manager in my time. As a program manager, accountable for how much I'm spending on my project and my program, but I didn't actually go into the systems and total everything up. I had somebody in my team that gave me that data, and they updated my spreadsheet. I looked at it and kind of went, oh, there's a difference between knowing and using the data than actually getting the data yourself, and the two are entirely different.
I guess maybe a key thing is if you're the person that has the authority to make a decision, you'd better be the same person that's accountable for the results of that decision. So if you decide, Stakeholder says, can we squeeze this into the next release? Yes, no problem at all. As a result, the next release is a little bit later. If it's somebody else who's going to answer for that, that's where you get the
Yeah.
trouble.
And I suppose that's where in some organizations they have project managers and product owners. And so the product owner is trying to manage scope. And so if they want to add in an extra bells and whistles, that means potentially extra sprints, increases the cost. But if the project manager is managing the cost, then the product owner has now got to ask permission to manage the scope. So they're not really owning, they don't really have that sense of ownership, do they?
And that's where we get into delayed decision making and ineffective decision making. Any situation where somebody somewhere just can approve something that affects somebody else's plans. We
Yeah.
always, can I have budget for another server, or
Mm.
can we have another tester in our team?
Yeah.
It's always if there is a separation of,
Mm.
of decision making versus results. That's where you get
Yeah. It's also
ineffective
like
decision making.
you also see this in teams that aren't trying to do agile, where you've got product functions and engineering functions, and they're not fully aligned, and engineering get criticized because they're not able to commit to delivery dates, and they can't commit because product won't. They're getting this. Well, when are you going to deliver? Well, tell me what you want. Well, well, it depends on when you're going to deliver it. And you end up in this cyclic conversation, and there's no collaboration between engineering and product, and they're both pointing the finger at each other.
Um, I thought I would introduce a slightly different structure, which I've seen, which is um, it's not that common, but with some organizations where they talk about the delivery manager um, is actually more aligned to the product side of things. So there's an engineering team, there's a Scrum Master that might have a number of teams, and then there is a delivery manager who does all that stakeholder management and forecasting and those kinds of things, but actually doesn't do the facilitation aspects and the kind of like the team building aspects of the Scrum Master role. And so I think one thing that I'm mindful of is that delivery lead and delivery manager is different within different organizations. So if you if you do see that as a title, what we've been talking about today might be different to what is on offer there. Is that have you seen delivery lead or delivery manager mean something else in organizations?
I think it comes into that anti-pattern though of, oh, we've got these weak Scrum Masters that all they do is like you woo-woo meetings and not actually take any accountability for delivery. So you kind of put someone else on top of, and then you kind of like, well, what do the Scrum Masters do all day? Sort of type conversations. So I do see it, but it makes me uncomfortable. You've basically created a junior and senior person that should really be doing the same job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I often think of it as there being three kind of core career pathways. There's business and products as one, there's technology as a second, and then there's process and as a third. And quite often you'll get combinations. So it's very common for a Scrum Master to also be a developer, which can work okay. Sometimes you can blur the lines, as we've spoken about, where the person leading the process can also do a little bit of business if they're accountable for the budgets, a delivery lead, and the sort of development manager role, I guess, combines technology with process as well a little bit. Where I see the biggest problems is where one of those pillars doesn't have enough skin in the game. So if products has so much taken away from them that they're quite diluted, all they're really doing is approving high level initiatives, and they're delegating all of the day-to-day operations to a delivery lead. They don't get involved in weekly meetings or sort of regular catch-ups. That's where you start to get a few dysfunctions and a few problems. So there's hundreds and hundreds of different ways of carving out the accountabilities within those three sort of areas of competence. But I think for it to work well, all three have got to be fairly closely and regularly involved for it to be effective.
Hmm. So let me ask you two guys a question, right? So, like, let's imagine it's your money, you own an organization, and or you've just taken over a team, and you've got these Scrum Masters. How would you sort of describe what success or Scrum Masters or delivery leads? Uh, what would you describe as being successful? What expectations would you have if they were spending your money?
For me, it is I would kind of measure them in a way by how effectively the team works. So, I'm not going to measure them based on whether they got a report out on time or other things like that. But obviously, they do need to lead by example. So, if they're facilitating events and they turn up late and then are not prepared and disorganized and stuff like that. So there is an element of understanding the role and setting the right example. But I would say, is the kind of outcomes of the events clear? Do people understand the purpose of those events? Are they contributing and do they get something meaningful from them that they can do? And therefore, is the team effective at delivering value? Product is probably really accountable for trying to decide, are they building the right things? Are they doing the right things? But actually getting stuff out the door to a decent kind of standard, a lot of that was in the team, but I would expect a Scrum Master or delivery lead to be calling that out if it's failing, and taking measures and using their experience and initiative to get that team working well together and understanding their own accountabilities. So getting kind of value from money from the time that's spent, in terms of, progress towards a goal. That's how I would kind of think about it.
Yeah, I think you'd first of all figure out why you hired this sort of team in the first place, because presumably, developers and software engineering is expensive, so there must be some legitimate reason why you've decided to use your money to create this capability. And then you sort of say to the team as a whole, well, you exist in order that I can realize this opportunity. I've got this vision, or maybe I've got a product already. I want to be able to build and sustain this product and ultimately bring probably return on investment, or maybe if I'm a not-for-profit or a charity, to realize the benefits that I want to realize. So you start with that sort of sense of purpose. Then you'd look at I'd like the Scrum accountability model. I think if all three are working well, I think it's really effective. So you'd say to your Scrum Master, your job is to help this team be an effective delivery. Give me this effective delivery platform. Give me the ability to build valuable stuff, to have a good level of predictability. If there's a market opportunity, we should be able to respond to it effectively and quickly. Product owners, you'd say, well, your job is to maximize the value of this product, to know what value is, first of all, to be able to see how that value might change, to be able to create compelling requirements, to work with engineers to articulate it well. And then for the developers, you say, well, you've got to get good at developing. You've got to get really good at implementing and providing good quality estimates to the product owner, and then investing in the technology and the platform and responding to change there. So I think you can sort of take those baseline accountabilities, and if each is working well, if each is on fire, that I guess that would be how I would hold that team to account. And if there's an area of that's not working as I'd hoped, that would be the question that you could ask. What's going on with predictability? 3 sprints in a row, we've said we're going to do this, we've only done this. I accept the fact that this will happen sometimes, but what's our plan? How are we going to address that?
I guess one of the things that I think you also have to be mindful of is that sometimes with the agile delivery lead role, it is a little bit more biased towards project than product. Whereas often when we think about Scrum Masters, they're thinking about longer term sort of processes. And so I think there is you've got to get stuff delivered regardless of whichever role it is, but also it's about the continuous improvement of the team as well, isn't it? Are we becoming more productive? Are we delivering more value? Are we striving for higher qualities? Are we improving our skills over time? All of those sorts of things. So those are all measures that I'd be looking for. So let's say you're a delivery lead or a Scrum Master right now, and you're thinking about next steps from a career development. Obviously, careers all very personal, but what would be your advice to somebody in those roles of what to do next to make themselves more valuable and to an organization?
I think there's a few things. You've touched on some of them yourself earlier, Paul. I think certainly understand different approaches, different frameworks, different methodologies, because if you're in a Scrum framework, there's plenty of room for XP techniques and things like that. So I have a really broad understanding of the different things that's out there, and when you can use them and what you can add in, to a situation. So that's one bit of it. I think also working on your kind of people skills, because I think, as the stakeholder management and interacting with people and effectively communicating things like forecasts, those kind of softer skills to do it in the right way, so people kind of understand that this isn't necessarily a commitment. It's the best understanding based on what we know at this point in time, and as we learn more, it may vary. So definitely work on those softer skills, as well as the kind of the techniques and technical skills. I'd say those are the don't go all one or the other. You need to build up both of those.
One of the challenges, there's always 10 things you could be doing or working on and improving. Knowing which one is the most valuable to work on at any given time is sometimes the challenge. And actually, one thing to do there is just to ask around. Ask the product owner you're working with, ask the business, the sort of head of the business unit you're working with, what are your biggest challenges right now? What are your biggest frustrations? And if you find that out, then you can reflect back on, well, what can I do to help with that? What should I be working on? What should I be improving? But often it sounds like an obvious thing, but you can, rather than second guessing what the best thing is, you can just ask the question.
I mean, it's kind of a rich tapestry, isn't it? I think sometimes some of the best career advice I've ever had is you go to the Gemba, or I'm sure it probably wasn't said to me in that way like 30 years ago, but actually go and see your customers and see how they use the product, sit with the engineers, maybe pair up with them, and see how they actually build the product. With those two things, it'll tell you what you need to do to create a more high-performing team and create more value for the customers. Just be curious, go and see. Don't just assume people are doing what they tell you they're doing.
Yeah, it's usually obvious. One of the things that so often happens with our clients, certainly when I'm engaged, is after the first month where you've made an improvement in a really sort of key area, oh, why didn't we do that before? It was obvious we had a problem with whatever it was that you just worked on. So the problems are often obvious, and going and seeing, as you say, Gemba walks or going to where the action's happening, it's often quite clear what needs to be done. It's just maybe not clear how to solve the problem.
And sometimes people tell you things are happening and they aren't actually happening. So I remember going to one organization, like, yes, we do pair programming. And then you sort of look around and will go, well, who's actually pairing? Nobody's actually pairing, and they've not been pairing for several months. So people have little myths about what they actually do. So go and see the real thing.
Well, that brings us to an end of this discussion. It's an interesting topic in terms of how the market's transitioning, but I think there are some fundamentals there that hold true between a delivery lead and a kind of Scrum Master in terms of actually thinking about the team and applying the value. And so, any last comments before we close the call?
It's been a great discussion. Yeah, I think really it's about the fundamentals, focusing on delivering value, working out what value is, and working out how to get it done. Whether you're a Scrum Master or a delivery lead, even a project manager, you can figure out the best way to do it within your team.
Yeah, you only exist to get stuff delivered.
That's it. Right. Thank you all.